Just delay a little bit. I see the broadcast is live overlay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Arthur Turnbull. I am the host of the Music Snobs podcast. And I have a hellified aura right now because I am getting direct sunlight through an archway window that will pass over. But I do glow. I do that, just not this intensely. So I am here with three friends. I'm really excited about this. I have my brother Harold Pride, who, as man, I think between you and I, we're like neck and neck on the who's the more nerdy about really what this is, about. I have jooZt Mattheij, who is the editor-in-chief of princevault.com. Man, I mean, just author, incredible researcher. It's just a beautiful thing to where you can say, if it's not on Prince Vault, it didn't happen. To be the authority that the estate will actually cross-reference, cross-check to make sure that they've got their facts right, and that's a beautiful work. And I also have Nicolay, co-founder of the Foreign Exchange. You're in the nerd running too, man, because we've had
I'm stoked.
conversations.
I've been stoked since like June.
But we are ready to go. We want to talk about the show, the live Sign of the Times tour stop that happened in June 20, 1987 at the Stadion de Galgenwald.
Well,
Yeah.
That's what I need. I need the authenticity.
Yeah.
In Utrecht, the Netherlands. This is a concert that was not widely bootlegged, follows suit that the estate has done in the 1999 box set, where they included a live show that was not bootlegged at all in that case, to give context to the recorded material. We also have the privilege of having jooZt with us because he was in attendance at that show. And Nicolay, who his parents at least thought he was too young to be there, lived close by to that stadium. And I know you've got a story about how you could hear sound checks, or what was it that did you actually kind of like go out to try to at least hear the concert as it was happening?
It's both. I've one memory of literally lying in bed. I was my parents' house is literally 500 feet away from the stadium, and they hadn't really done live shows there. This was the first season that they were going to do it, and I have a distinct memory of laying in my bed at night. It can't have been that late because I was like 12 at the time, or 11 or something like that, but he was sound checking Girls and Boys, and loud enough that it sounded sort of like coming out of the stereo at from the house next door. It was really loud, and from what I understood, they never did any concerts there after that year. But my parents were not. I wasn't concert going age, and but they did let me go to the gates, to see people coming out and the crowd streaming in, and just listening to the show from the other side of the gate, pretty much. And just the start of my fandom as a whole was that seed. And then next year, the year after that, the Love Sexy tour is when it really sort of cemented itself and became my artist. The music that I'd listened to before and liked before was more kind of like what you liked at the time, like Wham or something like that. Prince was the first artist that I liked that, for instance, my parents didn't like, or my classmates were kind of like whatever about. And so Prince, he became my dude. 87, 88.
Yes. Did you have a similar experience? Did the fandom really start at Sign of the Times?
Sort of did, yeah. Actually, the year before, I was lucky to be able to go to the show, the Parade Tour in Rotterdam with the brother of my best friend. Was so eager in getting tickets that he had surplus tickets, And so he asked, his little kid brother and me to come along, and another friend. So we did, and I was aware of Prince, obviously, but just as as I was aware of music. But I saw him live, like for the first time there, and then well, I was blown away. So the next year, when Sign of the Times came, I was deep into it and did the whole thing with lining up, getting tickets and everything in May, and went to the show in Utrecht, where I didn't live then, but where I live now. I'm sitting here, right, and it's about a mile from the stadium. It's close by. I have the poster in the background as well that we had, and I was. And well, then seeing that show, I actually chose to go the second day because I did that. I happened to go the second day in 1986, and it was just something was like, oh, that was the best show then of the three, and I thought, well, I'll do that again. I go to the second show, and it was a good choice because it was the longest show of the tour, it turned out, and it was the best show in Utrecht possibly because the next day he shortened it down for rain, and rain actually, played a big. Influence on him cancelling the Wembley shows and also him making the film then possibly. And well, I think it was maybe on that night or the night before, on the 19th, that he really started his appreciation, Prince did, for the Dutch audience, so how zealous they are and enthusiastic, and musically, he could guide them in the sing-along, as you hear in Forever in My Life, for instance, and in Housequake he does that as well. And well, a lot of those things happened. I think it was sort of a key moment, this show, and a turning point in Prince's career, which is, I think it's a good reason that they chose to put this one on the box set, even when it's obviously not a recording that was made necessarily to be released, because I've heard complaints, people saying it's the mix is not right, you can't hear the audience not well enough, but that is just because it's not a 24-track recording, obviously. It was just recorded as Prince recorded all his shows, and we're happy that those tapes were preserved and found by the estate so they could release the show.
If I could ask you, especially because you went to back-to-back Prince tours, the difference between first of all, we know that we're dealing with two different bands. Parade Tour is the Final Revolution tour, a tour that did not come to the U.S. aside from a handful of shows branded as hit and run shows, and then coming a year later with Sign of the Times. Did you sense an impact then about Prince being as diverse or as rich, to be able to go from this guy in this group to this guy?
At that time, maybe not so much, but also, I was 16 at the time, going to be 17 later that year. I didn't see a lot of live acts in between that. Prince and the Revolution in Rotterdam was my first live show, and I think I saw maybe Level 42 and maybe some other band in between, and that was it. And what I remember thinking, what I could tell on the show was that we didn't know so much back then. I mean, there wasn't the internet. You didn't know anything, so
right.
We knew that the Revolution was out, obviously. He had a new band, and we knew Sheila E. would be on drums. That was sort of communicated in the press or whatever. It was announced with the shows that he would be coming with a new band and all that. And I remember I didn't have, arena tickets. I was sort of not in the nosebleeds, but I was sort of far away from the stadium. And I mean, what I remember is the naivety about it, that we thought, oh, okay, at least he has a girl again on guitar, and that was Miko, but he had long hair, that was kind of sort of how far away I was. I couldn't see that, but yeah, the show itself was, Parade already blew me away. I mean, I came into it not knowing Prince, and after that, I got all his albums as quickly as I could, and I studied him, and then again, as you said, seeing him again the next year with a completely new show, everything was different. I mean, the whole band was different. Well, Fink was the same, and Nico was there previously. The horns were there, but essentially a whole new band and the whole thing, and how Prince, just presented everything that was. Yeah, it blew my mind away again once more, and really cemented my idea that Prince is someone to really follow, musically speaking, and so I did.
Well, if I can not only bring Harold into this, but also speak for him a little bit, we were jealous in the States because the last tour that I had seen was Purple Rain in 1985. I did see an appearance by The Revolution with Sheila E. In San Francisco in 1986 as a warm-up, right? But even take that out of it, I don't see Prince again until 1988 with Love Sexy. So I've got 84, 85 Prince, and then I've got 88 Prince, who isn't really doing any Sign of the Times material on this tour. And the gulf in the middle is filled by two films, Under the Cherry Moon, and the Sign of the Times film, which has that, as good as it is, and I'm arguing on the side that it's the best concert film, and I fight Talking Heads fans, but as good as it is, it still has that Prince polish, the overdubbing, the acting interlude to try to weave a story, around the live, performances. But we don't get in the US, we don't get what you got that we can hear on this live set. To me, I really appreciate that this is a Prince live album that isn't a quote unquote Prince live album. No overdubs. You can hear mistakes. You get that actual raw feeling about what is actually the music that's being presented, as opposed to what Prince's, after the fact vision, being presented to us. I think that in real time, the dissolving of the Revolution and premiering this band, and again, I don't actually hear this band until I see the movie, but to know that they are from the San Francisco Bay Area gave such a completely different approach to the music that it did make me wonder, wow, could the Revolution have even done this material? I don't know.
Is that my cue?
It sounds like it is your cue.
Yeah, because I can answer that real in like 2 letters, but I want us to talk for a full 90 minutes. One of the most striking things about the film, and then obviously in the 30 some odd years that have kind of elapsed since the film was released, we've heard rehearsals and sound checks, etc., from specifically from the Sign of the Times moment, from that era's window. And one of the most striking things for me is just how familial they are with each other musically so quickly, right? Like when you listen to those early rehearsals, and the early rehearsals kind of stand out because a lot of songs that were kind of truncated or abbreviated for the tour were kind of played in their full form. They just played so well together immediately. And I think part of Prince's confidence in the kind of ecosystem he kind of built leading into 86 and thinking about this band as almost like an all-star team. If you really want to use it, if you want to use sports metaphors, it's kind of like Lisa Coleman said recently, how in 86, it appeared as though his studio work was, if he wasn't doing it exclusively alone, he would kind of parse members from Sheila E.'s band or parse members that were residual from the family into his own recordings. This is a band that had essentially been a part of his all-star network for years leading into it. So by the time you get to 87, as new as they aren't new. And when you think about from a flexibility standpoint and from an musicality standpoint, all the ideas that are explored in this 90 minutes, this is Prince's, I mean, I can imagine that this is Prince's Tower of Power, right? Like this is Prince's Weather Report. This is Prince's Return to Forever. And just when you think about like from a measurement standpoint, how swiftly they kind of navigated turns in the show without there being kind of this quasi storyline that we got in the film version. There were a lot of exaggerations and enhancements there, but ultimately this is a highly musical show, and this is a highly musical band with a capacity that we've not seen his bands have up until that point.
Yeah. Okay. But now, okay, jooZt, let me pose the same question to you, having seen both shows live.
Yeah. What I noticed also now seeing the New Year's Eve show, and you can also see it in the film, that what this band added musically, they were versatile and well drilled and rehearsed. You know, every cue was dead on. The Revolution had that, but then what was added for this band was also choreography. You know, on top of everything, not only Cat did dances and Brooks and Wally did the dances, but the whole band. You know, if Prince plays Housequake, the whole band does the Housequake. You know, you play your part, but you do the Housequake dance, and all those dances, that was something. The Revolution did that a little bit, of course, and Baby I'm a Star, you know, at the end they had the bits with all that on the Purple Rain tour. I remember seeing that, but I think, yeah, that Prince really had a knack for, you know, knowing what he would need next. He maybe outgrew the Revolution and wanted to renew himself, and also doing that with a new band, and he kept the elements that he could use from the Revolution and added to it in a way that that he saw, you know, his rebirth as a solo artist after disbanding the Revolution, to go along with him and to take him to a next level, even when, you know, the Revolution was not a shitty band at all, so to say, but he took it to a next level, which was amazing to see with that band.
One other piece I wanted to point out, Arthur, and I've brought it up in previous conversations around the importance of soloing to an artist like Prince, and not just soloing. I mean, obviously, I mean, it's Prince's show, and you're only going to be within so much of a spotlight in his show, but relative to his own musical ideas and being able to kind of have those ideas function as a pivot for his own live, his prior to, you know, obviously the integration of, you know, Matt Billiston and Eric Leeds into the Revolution, his go-to soloist in his prior band was Dr. Fink.
Yep.
Right. So that was essentially the person he called on if he was in the middle of, if he was in the midst of an improvisational moment. Matt was a part of that net safety net. Once you have the integration of the caliber of musician that Eric Leeds, Atlanta Blitz, and Miko Weaver kind of represented, and then build a band around that where everyone can solo, then, you know, it's only right that the appearance of after shows begins to really take hold with this particular band, because it was just a really fertile ground for exploration in a way that his prior bands and some of his set lists kind of remained embellishments of the album arrangements.
Yeah.
This band had an inherent quality about them where, by virtue of them, you know, again, Sheila E., fusion, you know, Afro-Cuban influences there, and some of these musicians being hers first, those components were inherent in the nucleus of this band. So Prince
Mm-hmm.
could truly do more without it being kind of like a sacrifice or some sort of negative, building some sort of negative framework around his prior units. They functioned well then, but this particular band, they had a capacity that we'd not seen prior to 87 with him.
Yeah, and I think for me, well, I know for me, the addition of Cat Glover specifically added. I mean, hell, she was a lightning bolt because it gave Prince a dance partner.
Yep. And
it there was choreography, but this was not band choreography. This was a partner that could dance as well or better than Prince.
Right.
And being of the opposite sex, he could do things. They could have a almost a conversation just within their dance.
Right.
That became a part of the song that they were playing. Particularly Hot Thing.
Right.
And I remember seeing Hot Thing, on screen, and it's always cliche for me in a Prince conversation to talk about how my mind was blown. So let's just say that my mind had been blown from whenever to whenever, right? So take it all under the guise of Arthur's mind was blown. But looking at the detail and how she was used, and not the stage was one aspect of it, but she was integral in the lead up to the album. So
Absolutely.
When we're talking about no Instagram, no Facebook, no Twitter, and you're finding nuggets out in magazines for the most part. You come off of the disbandment of the revolution, and you get in early 1987, a poster of an upcoming album that just has what appears to be a female figure with a giant black heart in front of her. And then you fast forward a few weeks to when the single is available, and the single, Sign of the Times, shout out to La La La, he on the B-side. Yeah. When you get to the single, you flip that single over and you see a woman with a peach cloud guitar, and glasses, and you're like, I'll be damned. Is that Prince? That's not Prince.
Right.
Is that Prince? And that is something that he would not have been able to do on his own or with the revolution. I mean, granted, you could hire a model or something like that. Mm-hmm. But what I'm saying is that Cat was an ingredient of this entire vision that was then manifest, into a live show. And I think that at looking at footage of what I've seen, with the expanded revolution, going into this band, you really do see Prince level up. And that's not, I mean, I'm just jealous, man. Y'all saw that in real time.
Yeah.
But hey, you know what? Let me ask, and I do want to get Nicolay, I'm gonna get you into this, but jooZt, let me ask you this. So I think we've all been at shows that we then later have heard bootlegs of that spark new memories. Do you ever have any new memories sparked for you now that you can you can hear the show and be like, oh yeah?
Well, back in the day, obviously this was the show I went to, so this was the show I got the bootleg tape of, and it was before I started having loads of bootlegs of all kinds. I started out of just having the shows I went to. So I remember hearing it back now that, oh yes, I played this a lot, I mean, the guitar solo he does in Forever in My Life, the acoustic thing. I learned to play it on guitar, I can still play it now, but I forgot about it completely. And it's a very good show. I just, I remember how amazing Housequake is. I actually remember from hearing it back how, in It's Gonna Be a Beautiful Night, that Sheila actually makes a mistake and he scolds her on stage for it, like that part. And I love it that they didn't try to do anything with the show. There's some microphone feedback at some point that, it's just there. It's not a perfect show at any length. There are probably better shows that he did, it has some blemishes and all that, but it makes for a really good live feel that you get from it. That really is the show, and you can just hear his enthusiasm in it and how well he was connecting with the audience on that night. So I think that is special for this release. Yes.
I want to come back to a point that Harold had brought up about soloing, and in the film Sign of the Times, the period in when Prince is not on stage, but the band is featured, is "Take the A Train," a standard by Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn. Here, though, we get, to me, the absolute treat, where that feature happens around the song 4 from the Madhouse 6 LP. And Nicolay, I remember you when you and I were talking, I think we did a show a few years ago, but when you and I were talking, you had brought out the concert, a club show that happened about a month before this concert in Munich, Germany, at the Park Cafe. And how, and it is, if you can find it, I've seen some YouTube recordings of it, audience, do a search, Prince, Munich, Germany, 1987. What you're going to get is what is effectively a Madhouse show that Prince comes in, behind that and does about 6, maybe 7 songs thereafter. But you're going to get the Ballad of Dorothy Parker, which was not a song that he did as part of the set list for the Sign of the Times tour. But what you do get is Dorothy Parker and what I believe is the first recording of this, a rearrangement of that song that incorporates the song 4 in the back half of it. Here, though, the Utrecht concert, here you get 4 as a song, and there's no Prince. Here's what I wonder, because I've been in discussions and I've read articles, and I've even seen quotes attributed to Prince to say that, that the European audience, I don't necessarily have to play the hits. I can play what I want to play. And I've always felt some kind of way about that, because I felt that the implication, and it's not just Prince that has said this, it's basically European or and maybe even Japanese audiences, that they're a little more open to musical experimentation. Do you think that him featuring in the middle of his show a complete instrumental without his presence, is from a Madhouse album, and also Madhouse as an opening act, which never happened in the US, even on the Love Sexy tour, was something that he absolutely knew that he could do in Europe, but could not do in the US? And Nicolay, I do want you to get in here, and I will shut up, but knowing that you are an active performer and have been in front of different audiences, do you concur with that about the acceptance of certain musical styles?
I think so. But I think it's impossible to separate that from the, you can afford not to play Purple Rain somewhere where it wasn't this sort of like all-encompassing thing. And I think so. If you imagine the European, like somebody said on the chat, like, is Sign of the Times the Purple Rain in Europe? And it's really more, Love Sexy really was more that. I think Love Sexy was really when sort of those years leading up, just everything sort of consolidated, and the show was aired on television, live, I want to say. And so that's really, I think, when in Europe he was at his absolute peak. And I do think the European audience is like, it's funny I say that, because I was born and raised in Europe, but I've lived in the States long enough to sort of really am familiar with, I think, both audiences. And I do think we have to be careful not to put too much myth making, out there. And I think part of that whole sort of like Europeans got it better sort of thing is a little bit of that. but I do think that he felt, like similarly to how you referenced these American jazz artists and them going to like Paris and London and stuff like that, where they felt more respected, more appreciated. I do think there's a little bit of that, and Prince, I think, felt that from the start, and I think the after shows really started playing into that. So Madhouse, I think was a Madhouse opening was, I think, partly just Prince just straight up just flexing. Just, here is this other band that is obscure enough, I mean, it's an instrumental group, and I don't think people really knew their records at the time.
Yeah.
But here is an opening act that plays half an hour of relatively sort of wacky instrumental music, but at the same time in the Prince vocabulary, so completely on topic. And the after shows, I think, is where he took that and really put that out there. And that Munich show is really something that everybody should hear at least once, because it's like, you have Prince circa 87, then you have Madhouse circa 87, and then you have in the middle sort of that lane that really you can also kind of trace towards the Small Club show, but it's that fusion side of Prince where he improvises on a completely different level than he would ever do at the main concert shows. And I think Madhouse was a way for him to sort of flex another side of him, same as the time was, just a different time, a different era, and therefore a different personality. But again, somebody that has so many different sides of himself that he has to look for other platforms in order to put everything out. And that's why I hate that the Madhouse opening set is not included on this box set, is because that you almost can't see them separately. Visually, Madhouse was very exciting, because you had the girls coming out, presenting the numbers of the names of the tracks and stuff. And there was, they were wearing capes, they were wearing robes. It would have been really great had the box set included that, 25 more minutes to really give you an exact example of what a show in 87. Here's D'Angela. She's
and here we have the first drop in of the day, and I am so excited that she's here. D'Angela, she must have felt that I was about to jump in.
I will say I have to 100-fold agree with Nicolay. Like, the one thing that is missing from this box set is Madhouse. I mean, why? But I'm just thinking because they're going to give us a Madhouse Super Deluxe box set. That's what I'm holding out for, and I really hope that they do it, because there's some incredible material out there that they could choose from.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Arthur. I'm sorry. I apologize. Go ahead, Arthur.
Well, no, that's cool. One thing I really like is that Sheila E. is playing for, and not Dale Alexander, who's a drummer in the warm-up act. Because I mean, this song really benefits from her exposure to having been in bands, particularly George Duke's band with Ndugu Chancellor, an incredible late Ndugu, an incredible drummer. You wouldn't get that kind of power with the Revolution. And I mean, you got to forgive me. The reason why I keep invoking the Revolution has a lot to do with how just the context of the Sign of the Times box set overall was this outgrowth of Revolution material that then, was sprinkled with some things that he did on his own and then presented, by this band. I want to say that I am not a hater of the Revolution so much as I believe that they gave him what he needed at that time, and he needed something else. But I do recognize the timeline in when these songs were recorded and what contributions were made. But once we hit particularly the live Sign of the Times, we're clearly on another path, because several of these songs were rearranged. I mean, or at least arranged for a live show that didn't rely on electronic music. And to me, the Godzilla of all of that is Housequake.
Yeah.
How Housequake was like, oh damn, okay, so he's on something completely different here and not dependent on, I need to hear the jam and I need to hear it like it sounds, on the record.
Yeah. Housequake is the barometer. It's the barometer for me as a, over the years, and as you acquire more and you hear more relative to how outstanding a show was, from this tour, listen to what he's doing on Housequake, and you listen to what he's doing on It's Going to Be a Beautiful Night. And when I read that this particular show was included in the box set before it was released, I said, well, Housequake is longer. I think Housequake is actually longer here than in any other arena show from the tour. So I mean, that in and of itself is a bit of an anomaly, but that band just thrives so well on that fire, that it just, from a tour standpoint, whether you're talking about Sign of the Times or Love Sexy, they sustain that in a way that if you wanted to just like engage the effectiveness or what the room felt like, or what Prince's mood was, how jovial he showed up on Housequake would always give you the answer. And kind of going back, one of the things I wanted to do, and it was a point raised a few moments ago, just to talk about the importance of Sheila E., and also to talk about, Prince taking a quote unquote exploratory show to European audiences, and those European audiences being more receptive, which, as someone who born and raised in the US, I'll always acknowledge a blind spot there. Yet and still, he chose Black folks from Oakland to give them that. Right. So when we talk about sophistication, it's like, he knew who could do that, right? And who could do that? Folks who are kind of bred with this intuitive and inherent quality, this flexibility, if you will, to offer his compositions that kept up with his own increasing need for spontaneity, right? Like, this is someone who could perform a set list that is, pretty static and doesn't change from one night to the next, but how the band performs from one night to the next, even if they are staying within the confines of the rehearsed arrangements, can be different based on his energy. And the after shows, and when we think about, if you really just want to focus on Sheila and Prince's relationship, you really understand how symbiotic and how nonverbal their level of communication was with each other when you listen to the after shows. When you listen to the after shows, and this is someone who would occasionally start playing an improv 5 or 10 minutes before Prince would come on stage for an after show. You know what I mean? So it's just like, again, that quality of confidence, and by proxy of the musicians that she brought into that network, and that she included in her own network first before Prince expanded his. Those folks having like an inherent vocabulary to fit into something, like it was a perfect marriage. So I do think that there's a lot of ideas that kind of coexist. It's like, I get it. Would a Madhouse audience have been different in the US? Yes. But we had Black folks playing in Europe as well, and it went over like gangbusters. So we don't need to remove that component from the moment. One of the pieces I was discussing with D'Angela, and part of why it's important to talk about Madhouse, it is important to talk about Sheila E. and her skill set as a musician, is that Sign of the Times was released at a moment where Prince's albums were just kind of like a starting point, but these albums were true experiences. So to really acknowledge the experience of Sign of the Times, you have to acknowledge Madhouse. To acknowledge the experience of 1999, how dare you ignore Vanity 6? How dare you ignore The Time? You know what I mean? So it's kind of like those are kind of these kind of static blind spots grown, like built into some of these releases. And, Prince's fan community is probably look, we're a hard lot to please. So there's always going to be criticism. There's always going to be criticism at any level. But ultimately, for all of us who were fortunate enough to have experienced these releases in real time, we know how important these kind of circulating releases and these other artists were to this particular project. For me, the Cuckoo video really kicked off Sign of the Times. For me, the Cuckoo video and seeing Sheila and Kat dancing together, that kicked off Sign of the Times for me. And one other piece I want to bring up about Kat that someone mentioned, I think it was you, Arthur, and we have to talk about how important Kat was to his band and how unique Prince's relationship with Kat was. If you just, I never make grandiose claims to intel that other folks don't have, right? All you have to do is watch. All you have to do is watch. And when you see how Prince reacts and responds to Kat, and you think of all the women, all the dancers, the highly talented and highly trained dancers he's had since, he doesn't interact with any of them the way he interacted with Kat. Not a one, and she's to be given credit. She's to be credited for that. We have to acknowledge that. We have to really seize this particular moment as an opportunity to talk about not the kind of residual mourning of the revolution, but acknowledging how fantastic these people were who he chose to support this album.
Yeah, I remember that when I found out that Sheila E. was playing drums, and I never, you don't see Sheila E. playing drums, you see her playing timbales, that she was basically putting her recording career on pause to be in Prince's touring band. I knew that this was going to be a serious situation, to have to contend with. But I am disappointed. All the love that I have for the box set and the work that went into it to compile these songs in some kind of, some tangible order, and how this, how Sign of the Times was, developed. It is a shame, and I do think that it is a loss to some degree to actually not have any audio of an after show included, as however best you can. And the 1988 Love Sexy after shows, the Small Club, also in the Netherlands, is the apex of that in terms of sound quality. But the Munich show, for example, is very, very good, because you don't have the other side of that experience. And it's akin to how in the 40s, when big bands were king, you had these players who had gigs with these big bands led by singers who would then go to clubs and play the music that they actually wanted to play. And that's how you got bebop and just real deal improvisational jazz. I saw this in the same kind of light, that we are playing the show, but here we are really going to, work out our music.
I gotta think, Arthur, that like once this sort of tip of the iceberg of these deluxe editions has sort of come and gone, I gotta think they have to do something to sort of approach the concert archive, and whether that's a live show box set, or whether that's like something like more similar to like a Neil Young approach. But ultimately you can't really do, like, here you have an artist here that just including one show of a tour is simply just not really cutting it, where that might be true for Madonna or and I'm not speaking ill, but you can't really, same as you can't capture the 1999 tour with just one Detroit show when there was just two on a night alone. You can't really do him justice with just one show, or in this case, a show and a DVD. And I gotta hope that at some point they start looking at this and take an approach of like, how can we present more material, particularly rare stuff like these after shows or these, we know that these recordings exist. We know they sound good, good enough to make it happen. But I think they're going to have to work that out on a commercial level. Like, how can you market that? How can you make that make sense? But I got to think that a second coming, no pun intended, of this vault material, which is what Howe, I think, has alluded to in that last interview. I think that's going to be an opportunity for them to really dig in and be like, okay, let's take 4 or 5 of these regular concert shows and 3 or 4 after shows, but we can do that for every tour,
Yeah, I think, rehearsals and sound checks are really, really, really critical in kind of like
that's a great point.
Like observing Prince's creative process. And not only is it important, but it also is strikingly evident who was in charge versus this whole community thing that folks come up with now, like we all were a part of a democracy. Prince ran his shows in stadiums.
I hate
like if you listen to the sound, if you listen to the sound checks, if you listen to the rehearsals, that is not done by committee. It's done with by Prince, under the tutelage of Prince's band leadership. But the part of the reason why that work is so imperative is that as a young person listening to it, that's how I was able to like develop music literacy. To kind of be able to identify signatures or cues that he would give language to in rehearsals that you didn't hear him do in shows. And as someone who isn't a musician, you start to kind of understand that by absorbing how Prince articulated his desires to his band members. That's just a different level of scholarship that I think is so critical to the big picture around each of his projects. It's including again, connecting to my comment around the experience. Each release was truly an experience, and the more we kind of scratch the surface on or lumping in, if you will, the live material, there's so much else to be discovered beyond the product, or beyond the 16 songs that we know, just by virtue of kind of absorbing who he was as a teacher, who he was as a teacher, because that's something that we don't have visibility into, and we didn't have visibility into through official releases. Even, I mean, we can speak to Prince's insatiable desire to overdub live recordings so they turn into live-ish recordings, but we didn't hear a lot of Prince giving direction, and during his life, and it was, and it's really, really important. As a kid, part of the hysteria around Purple Rain was to hear Prince speak, like to hear what he sounded like because you just didn't know. So the rehearsals and the sound checks to that point, and how he was able to articulate what it is that he needed for a particular moment from his musicians, it's a jewel. It's really, really critical.
Well, what I think is, so if I may, quick, there's a early Sign of the Times rehearsal, because like we're talking about Sheila and her coming in, she also instantly became the band leader. So you got to imagine, not only did she come in there with a bunch of new people, but she took over the rehearsals. And there's a hilarious early rehearsal where they're rehearsing Controversy, and they actually have to get the record out and play along to the record to figure out the Lord's Prayer part and all that stuff. But there's a heated argument between Sheila and Matt Fink, which is it's such a look behind the scenes of literally these two bands, like literally that sort of in between, where Matt is trying to argue a point about how long a verse, how many bars, this and this and that, and it literally is the old guard versus the new guard, but Sheila wins out at the end because it's just Matt Fink who's left. But those rehearsals, that's what we need to hear. Like that's what Beach Boys fans have been listening to for 50 years, or Beatles fans, like those moments in the studio, and especially when we talk about these two bands, like the passing of the baton, in those rehearsals, you really hear like how did that work practically? Like how did they approach the material? And just hearing Sheila lead these rehearsals, and then later Prince comes in, because I think that's one where he's just straight up not there, and they're learning just a lot of the stuff.
I think that one was that moment you're mentioning. I think that was around I Could Never Take the Place of Your Man.
There's another one too like that, yeah. But the Lord's Prayer is another one where they literally have a boombox with the tape, and they're
totally.
They're learning they're literally learning these for the first time to whatever degree.
Yep.
You know, Love Sexy tour that was,
I didn't hear. I'm gonna be talking to you, Nicolay, about what rehearsal that is. But to Harold's point about this is not a committee, I totally agree with that. However, the interesting thing is that musically, and you really hear this in the after shows, musically it became a community. And you could question to say that, well, is this evidenced by Prince really trusting these musicians?
Yeah.
That's the obvious answer. Could it be that Prince trusts Sheila, and by proxy he trusts these musicians because in theory she's been working with them longer for Prince to come in and put the polish on it? And the reason that I bring that up is because I'm thinking about the fleeting moments of improvisation that would happen in these after shows, which to me is really critical when you talk about Madhouse, because Madhouse as recorded is regarded as jazz, and I'll put that in quotes, but in reality these aren't improvised performances. Most of these are Prince improvising with himself and then bringing in Eric Leeds for an overdub, or overdub is kind of putting it slightly. I mean, Eric is really playing these lines on these songs. But when you hear material live, and I'm going to jump out of this area and go to the small club show at the Trojan Horse, and you hear the opening, and if you don't have small club, you can find it. You can Google it. You can borrow somebody, email me, I'll get it to you. The opening instrumental, which is like this 10-ish minute piece, you can actually hear when it's Fink on keyboards, Sheila on drums, Levi Caesar on bass. They're working out a pattern. And then you hear Prince's guitar. And then what you'll actually hear is Levi Caesar Jr. start a bass line, start a run that Prince then follows. Comping Levi. Because so you hear this conversation happening. That's not going to happen on a tour where Levi says, you know what, Prince, I think we could do the bass line for Controversy like this. Prince going to send him right on out the door. But you get that in these club shows because, well, for whatever reason, the pressure isn't there. The adventure, the spirit of adventure is there. The trust is there. All of those other components are there. But you really learn the musical language of Prince having musicians that are so pliable that he can work out these ideas with. I really wonder, and I know, Edgar, you can hear me. When you talk to Fink, if you could ask him about how those arrangements were created, who brought the arrangement of Dorothy Parker? Who brought the idea of melding 4 with Dorothy Parker? Who?
Susanna Melvoin. Sorry. Freudian slip. My bad. But let's just go ahead and give Susanna credit for this entire event. And but no, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I mean, hey, at the risk of me giving the impression that that what's on this box set isn't enough. I mean, I think that's just an obvious thing. I mean, there's just so much that's recorded. It's a no-win situation.
Yeah.
You do get a comprehensive idea of what took place, around this album.
And you touched on something really important, because isn't that missing from the box set a little bit, that angle?
To me, it is. I mean, what I would have liked, as much as I like the Paisley Park video, I would have loved to see whatever the footage looked like of the warm-up show at First Avenue in March of 1987 when he introduced that band in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
To see that, that would have been absolutely incredible, because talking about that whole old guard, new guard, you dealing with, this is Minneapolis.
Yes.
You know us. Who are these people? I know the guy on keyboards. I know Fink. I don't know these other people. That would have been something to really, behold. All quality, of that video aside.
I think, this nonverbal communication was so key to being a successful player in any of Prince's bands. And I think with this particular crew, I always kind of trace a conversation back to the Flesh, not because the Revolution is a comfort zone, it definitely isn't, but back to the Flesh session and, thinking about, from a formality standpoint, Levi is nowhere near the bass player at this point, but by virtue of him kind of absorbing what that moment felt like, what it is to be under Prince's direction, if you will, at the behest of his direction, and not playing arrangements, right? Like literally doing improvised material, and how successfully that nucleus stretched out or kind of articulated what it is that he needed it to be done at that moment. I think that foretells how successful this particular band was, because if you think about it, no pun intended, the only cat out of water was Cat. The only one that did not have any sort of the only one that wasn't a byproduct of, say, nepotism, if you will, was Cat. Everyone else had these kind of relations with, albeit whether directly or in a by virtue of being in Sheila's band, having some sort of association or understanding the level of discipline needed to be successful with any of his units. So when we think about, Prince being able to achieve that with this band as a one-off while having the Revolution, and then circling back to that moment and kind of connecting why this band was so musically and practically immediately successful in articulating a lot of the arrangements on the Sign of the Times album. It goes back to, that quasi-grooming, right? The quasi-grooming that had already taken place. Like Levi already understood or knew that there was, Sheila as a band leader, she's already kind of like super strict, but already understanding just by proxy of Sheila's connection to Prince, that moving into that space is going to be unlike anything else that informs your frame of reference, right? So by the time they get there, it's kind of like, okay, we're a well-oiled machine, but not.
Yeah. So if I could ask, I just thought of this. Yeah. I talked a little bit earlier about, I think I mentioned something about how, there were jazz musicians who, we might have been talking before we actually started the presentation here, but the idea of how there were U.S. jazz musicians who moved to Europe. Sonny Rollins famously, Dexter Gordon famously moved to France and lived there, basically just lived there. Because in part of the acceptance of the music, but in part of how he felt the people accepted him. Prince being a Black artist, and the U.S. especially, we look at everything through the lens of race and skin color. Were there many Black artists that came to the Netherlands that would elicit this kind of excitement?
I don't know that in detail that much. Prince was like a phenomenon worldwide, of course, and when he came, he was here in 81, but he came in 86. He was instantly, he was like the biggest thing since sliced bread to come to the Netherlands, so to say, and he was very popular. In general, I don't really dare to speak on it. I'm sorry.
No, nothing like that. Because for me, like I'm going to speak for the entire.
I think Michael
US
would probably be one of the few. Sorry.
No.
I think Michael Jackson would literally be one of the few others.
Right.
Probably.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Because I mean, with Under the Cherry Moon, having that be set in Nice, France, we already knew as an audience, in the U.S., we already knew that Prince was accepted by a swath of different racial and racial groups. We knew that. We could hear it in his music. We could see it at the shows that we went to. We could see it in his videos, etc. And knowing that Purple Rain, like Nicolay, when did Purple Rain debut? And when was the first time you saw Purple Rain?
I don't even remember. I mean, I think the main thing that I remember was that Purple Rain, the song, was a massive hit, and it included the video. So you would see the video literally several times a day. But I don't have any recollection of ever watching the movie until much, much later. And I know that from, I think it was Edgar's book. We're all shouting out Edgar here. But like, I think I learned from his book that the movie didn't come out, I think, until 85 or something. Well into 85 in Holland at the very least.
No, it debuted here in September '84.
Okay.
So
okay.
Not too long.
Oh, it wasn't as long as I thought it was then. Okay.
No.
Okay.
It was in other countries in Europe maybe, but I also didn't see it then because, as I said earlier, I wasn't aware of that I should be into Prince until 1986. So by then it was no longer in cinema, so I saw it much later. But but I think Prince coming here in Europe in '86, and then he realized that there was a whole different type of audience than he was accustomed to in the US that could bring him something else that he was looking for maybe. And I think that's also maybe the reason that he wasn't so interested in continuing, for instance, the Sign of the Times tour in the US, even when he was supposed to do that. And he just wanted other things. First off, he always was on to the next project, but I think he really saw like the European audience more into his music in a way, and more. I lost my train of thought, but do you know what I'm getting at? That he.
Yeah, I got you back. That he. Yeah. See, I thought the film was like instant zeitgeist, right? So it's interesting to know that the film came out a lot sooner than what I thought it did. I thought that either Under the Cherry Moon or the Parade album and the preceding albums culminated into this kind of reaction, because from what it's a genuine love. It's not a novelty type of love. The stories that I've heard, and I have been listening to Andrea Swenson's podcast series for the Prince Estate, or in partnership with the Prince Estate and Warner Music, on the making of Sign of the Times. And jooZt is featured in the current episode number 7, along with several other fans who were actually at the show. And it does give kind of a comprehensive, as best as possible with I believe 4 or 5 people. But the idea that coming here, I mean one guy was talking about how he was wearing peach and black, how he was doing what he was. It's instructed on the ticket that you got to wear peach and black. So I'm gonna figure something out. I think that the presentation of this album and the presentation of this tour really solidified that love that the audience overseas, has for Prince. And I have had the benefit of seeing Prince outside of the US. And it was during the Rainbow Children tour. I saw him here in the US. I saw him in Japan. And it fundamentally was the same show. But he presented all the material in a bit of a different way, and even played songs that you didn't hear in the US that weren't so much experimental, but you could tell that he was kind of stretching out a little bit because I think that he felt, that he could.
What's really interesting, Arthur, is that window when you're talking about the Japanese leg of the One Night Alone tour. It's not the case for all of his tours, but I got into the habit of, like, as you listen to recordings from the later shows on the tour itinerary as an indication of where the next show is going to be. That One Night Alone, by the time in America, it was, if you're coming for the Purple Rain experience, leave. By the time he gets to Japan, Purple Rain is like the second song in the set. So, he was kind of easing back into hits, or primarily hits mode by the time the tour hits that portion of, or that leg rather. And I took that almost as an indication of him kind of, reacclimating himself to, like, the hits that we got from 2003 all the way down to Musicology, where there's just like this full-bodied, Renaissance kind of moment. The end of the One Night Alone tour already kind of harkens to that leaning. It wasn't the same. There wasn't the same show that he debuted in, like, March of 2002. It had morphed into something else. And when we look at the New Year's Eve show, I mean, it is fascinating on many, many levels. But we think about, from an era standpoint, we see Parade in that show, we see Sign of the Times, and we see a lot of Love Sexy all in 2.5 hours, right? So by the time you get to 88, some of that stuff starts to make sense. And you start to identify, at least from a musicality standpoint, you start to identify components that he kind of build a new set list and build a new show around already in 87. But
what's the story behind why he canceled the London shows?
I think there was partly because, well, on the Purple Rain tour he had the same, he started making the middle segment a lot longer just because he was bored, and what Harold just was talking about is sort of the thing as the tour progressed, whatever tour it was, he didn't want to be doing the same thing over and over again. The Parade tour was short enough for him to sort of not do it. I think he came into the Sign of the Times tour full on with the idea it would be a world tour, and I think a US leg was planned for the summer to start in the late summer, I think August of 87. And I think once the tour progressed, he kind of wanted to move on. He was done with it a little bit. And I think what happened was that in the Netherlands it rained. It were the first open air shows that he really did. We did the last tour shows of the Parade tour in Japan were open air, and Miami, the last tour of the Purple Rain tour, was open air, but there was good weather. He seemingly never thought that it could also rain for open air shows. And that happened in the Netherlands. There was a threat of rain, and they had already planned for the Ahoy to be rented in Rotterdam in case they would have to move shows, would they have to be cancelled because of the rain. And apparently there's a story that during the third show, before the first show in the Netherlands, it did rain. During soundcheck it did rain, and Prince had, I think I told it before, and this is a known story, but for those who don't know, there were seats placed in the stadium, and that's not something we were accustomed to in the Netherlands. We are standing room only shows were what we had mostly, festival style. And so seats in the audience in the arena was not something we're accustomed to, but that was so, and it was an open air show, but it had rained the day before, so they were setting up the stage and so Prince arrived at the stadium for the sound check, and he saw that there was a puddle of water in every single seat. There were 6,000 seats, so he said, drill a hole in all seats, 6,000 seats, I want to hole in them so people don't get their asses wet. So that was the thing. So that was, that started the thing off with rain. So it was like, okay, it's going to rain maybe. And the first show, it did not rain. But he was very tense because it could have rained. Second show which was the one that is released now. He was in a great mood. It didn't rain and it was fine. So it was an excellent show. The day after happened to be, because this was the longest show of the tour, the day after was the shortest show of the tour because it did rain. Mm-hmm. And he cut Forever in My Life from the set list to make the show shorter. And apparently in the middle of the set he stormed off, probably for a change of clothes that he would do. And he would say, cancel the rest of the shows. I'm not playing anymore, I'm not doing it. So it was like, okay, what's going to happen? And I think that prompted him to then say Wembley. He was going to play Wembley Stadium, not Wembley Arena, also open air. Mm-hmm. And he didn't want to risk that. He was sort of getting the feeling he was done with the tour. So that combination of things made him think, well, we booked Ahoy anyway for, in case of rain, we might just play extra shows there. And so they put those on sale, and not until after they put those on sale, they weren't necessarily put on sale so he could do a movie. They were just put on sale because he had he had time to kill. He was still in the Netherlands. The England show were cancelled. They tried to find replacements for them, but they couldn't for legal reasons. Had to do with a permit that they couldn't get. So he was in the Netherlands anyway, and he was going to do the shows. And then, like the day before the show, the tickets were already on sale. He decided that he would film them. And I don't know if at that point he already decided he wasn't even going to do the US tour anymore. I never saw an itinerary for it. I don't know if it was fully booked. It wasn't properly announced. I don't think there were any tickets sold for. I don't know when that decision came with him to not do them, but anyway, in the end, the film was sort of presented as a replacement for what would have been the US tour. But of course, it's a great film, but it's not the same thing as a live show.
No, it's not the same thing. Do you think that there's the theory that because Paisley Park was going to open, that he was so excited to get into Paisley Park that he was like, yeah, I'm done. I'm going to get into my...
That is a very good hypothesis. I would say that is very likely that also played into effect, that he was like, I have my playground ready now. I want to play. I don't want to, be on the road anymore. But it's a lot like that with bands, when they're on the road, it's like, well, I wish we were home, and when they were home, like, okay, I want to go out to tour again. I mean, that happens to more other bands than just Prince, I think. But Paisley Park being ready could have very well been a reason for him as well to think, I want to go play with my playground. Yeah.
Nicolay, if I could ask you a question about reproducing music live that's identical to the sounds that you create in the studio. I know that you will sometimes reconstruct synth lines and reproduce them. Thinking about particularly the live version of Play in the Sunshine, and also if I was your girlfriend, how the patches, they're not the same. Sign of the Times, how it opens and what Pink is playing. It's like there's not a one-to-one relationship between the synth I hear on the record and the synth that I'm hearing live. And to me, it's like it's the same button, right? Is it as easy? Clearly, it's not as easy as that. Yeah.
Well, it's a combination. I think some of them are the actual patches, but I think one of the things that made this band really great is that it was sort of a step away from like, okay, we have the Oberheim and then we have the Lynn. Like for instance, the Hammond B3 organ really features prominently in both Bonnie's as well as Fink's rigs for this show, and I think even the Love Sexy tour. And this was a time where Prince was really kind of shifting, I think, from those classic sounds. There's a lot of Fairlight on this record, and they had Fairlights out there on the stage because that was the only way to do it. So those orchestral hits in Sign of the Times come directly out of a Fairlight. And I think everything in that track actually comes out of the Fairlight, because somebody please ask Fink, but I don't think Fink does anything in the first song. Like, I think it's literally coming out of a sequence. I mean, he probably plays the pads, I think, in the
I thought he was playing the bass
in the
line.
chorus.
That's
Yeah, I mean,
thinking
maybe
that
he
he's playing
does. I don't really. I mean, he could, but at the same time, but I think they were really. It was a combination of playing very true to the record. Like if Fink plays the solo in Head, like it's the solo in Head. It's the same sound. It's the whole thing. But there are musical innovations that kind of are brought into brought in on stage. You know, the Fairlight, the sequential circuits keyboards that he used on Hot Thing, like those ring modulator basses and leads on Hot Thing is, you know, so there were sound, there were improvements in sound, but I do think they were largely using, you know, same as they were using the DX7s on tour that were actually Prince's DX7s. They were largely the same patches, but they were augmented with Hammond organs, with, you know, ultimately, you know, much more of a, same as Miko, you know, Miko is largely playing the album parts, but he's doing that in a way that I think it just takes it to a whole nother level. And I think we cannot do these guys justice in an hour and a half, because people that know me know that I'm a Levi fanatic, and the glory that is Levi in Prince. Prince's bands over the years, even as a guitarist later in the 93 era, where he just switches from being, I think, his best bass player ever to his best side guitar player ever.
Yes.
It's seemingly over the course of a year, which we now know that he was a guitar player first, right? So it's like, but he's proficient, obviously. So I mean, we can't really. And Miko I think Miko made the Parade tour personally for me.
Absolutely.
And I think he also makes this tour. I think Prince trusted him as a guitar player more than I think any other guitar player in his universe. And I think even was a little jealous of him, probably. Right?
These are musicians that had an agency that we didn't see later, and that we'd not seen prior to that. You know, Levi. There's a Love Sexy show in Houston, which is late in the tour, in the U.S. leg of the tour, and Prince calls Levi a genius, and because he is, you know, and you know, I don't know of another bass player. He's had some amazing bass players, but Levi is easily Prince's most expressive bass player, without being obtrusive, which is again that's a fine line to walk. And Miko, again, you know, Miko, when I think about like Parade and Prince putting his guitar down because of Miko's, you know, Miko's integration into that moment. Obviously, I mean, a larger overarching purpose may have been for Prince to focus on his showmanship, but for someone like Prince to sit his guitar down, right, when someone like Miko is ushered in, when you really sit with those shows and you're familiar with who's playing what, and you hear Miko, I mean, this is someone who is he is augmenting and enhancing spaces in a way that you just literally can't teach. And, you know, that's truly, I feel like this band is a band full of Mikos. It's a band full of Sheilas. It's a band of folks who all speak the same language, that, you know, just makes us talking about this time and honoring them so critical, right? It's just kind of like, okay, I get it, you know, delving into the album and those 16 tracks, and I get all the scholarship devoted to the lead up to the release of Sign of the Times. But when we think about this band, how expressive they were, and how truncated this tour was, and how that may have fed into just how fiery each and every single show was. I haven't heard a dull Sign of the Times show. It just, I'm sure it just literally doesn't exist, because this was a band that rehearsed longer for the tour than the actual tour ended up being. Like, you know what I mean? So by the time May '87 hits, it's kind of like, oh, okay.
So you're perfectly fine with the inclusion of this show as the live example of the.
But the thing, I absolutely am, because I know that you can throw a rock on any Sign of the Times show and you're going to get a phenomenal one. So and that actually kind of goes into like one of the questions I wanted to ask you guys. before we ended this was, number one, and I have it written down. Talk to me about, and I would love to hear from everyone, your impressions of Sign of the Times as an opening track of the show. Your thoughts on that. What was the highlight of the Sign of the Times show? And what were your top 3 tours?
Wow.
that should be 15, 20 minutes. That should be 15, 20 minutes. That take us out.
Yeah.
But
well, JooZt, why don't you start?
Sign of the Times as an opening worked very well, I thought, because he starts it alone, which is unique, and then have the band come, walking down the aisles with the drums. I mean, it's such a unique opening that you're right into the show, but he also, just Prince alone on stage captures you already, he is that. You don't even miss the band. You don't even think about the band not being there yet until they come on, and then it's, it really blew me away at that point. But like any moment in a Prince show that you see for the first time sort of blows you away, especially those 80s tour that were so orchestrated and choreographed and everything, like his later shows were also that, but they were also more spontaneous. Prince was often more a band leader, but he really here the performing, great artist Prince that, what took his albums on the road. Like that. So, and I thought Sign of the Times worked very well. Are we gonna do all my answers to your question first? What else you want to know? My favorite.
The highlight of this show, as well as your top 3 shows, your top 3 tours.
Right. The highlights of this show were. I always loved It's Gonna Be the Beautiful Night live, because it was made to be played live, and I loved it best when this band does it live. I mean, I have that with a lot of material. It's always best, when the band from that era plays it live, because it was really played. Not that I want them to follow the record or anything, because Prince, that is never really, so much the case. They don't try to sound like the record. They often have different arrangement, but It's Gonna Be a Beautiful Night lends itself so well for improvisations and everything. And this Prince had cues, and at some points they would just groove, and Prince would call out a cue, and then you would know the next part would be, and he would say thank you, good night, and he could come back or he wouldn't come back. And this is a fantastic way to, he could build on it as his mood was. He could make it long, he could make it short, he could do anything or throw it around or do something completely different with it. And I've always loved every rendition of it, especially with that band from that song. So that would be a highlight for me. And then my favorite 3 tours are probably predictable, but 86, 87, 88, that whole, the 80s tours were my jam. Yeah. If I have to do, they're all great, but if I have to choose, I will choose those 3.
All right, I'll let Nicolay go last. And I want to thank you for taking the host hat off of me for a second so I can just kind of like be a fan. I think that Sign of the Times as the opening, I agree that was just that was just brilliant. I remember seeing that on I believe it was the MTV Music Awards early in '87 when he comes out with the denim outfit, and this is really this debut. To really see that live, not necessarily on film, right, was really exciting. And also to have him, you have Kat in the distance, with the spotlight coming down on, straight down on her, and you immediately associate with that, okay, that actually wasn't Prince. It really was probably this woman here. And, and seeing Fink kind of almost as the anchor of the revolution, to be like, yeah, I still got somebody that has, been with me from, the beginning, that's still with me, holding me down. To have him there with the guitar on playing where he doesn't play the majority of the time at all. In fact, he put the guitar down like that for quite a few years. I think was also important because people really enjoy, hearing him play, and to see him pick up a guitar to play, and there's no other guitar player, which is kind of a prelude to what my favorite tour was always exciting. In the same way that if you go to a Michelle and Diego cello concert, and she's got a secondary bass player, you're like, damn, she's not gonna. But then when she picks up her bass, it's like, okay, get ready, because this is what we want to, hear from her. I think a favorite song from Sign of the Times from the tour, it's probably Housequake, because of what I was saying earlier about how different it was from the recorded version, and being different not for the sake of it, but because it had such a pliable arrangement, and you could get a lot of musical ideas out in the same space and time. In fact, once I heard it live, I actually appreciated the song more from the album, because I realized that there was so much to this, and I really wasn't listening to it. You know what I'm saying? I do think that my favorite tour, and I've been fortunate to see several, but I think the Hit and Run tour that he did in 2000 was really, really special, because he was Prince again. He had gotten to a point in his battle with Warner Brothers that he felt he could take his identity back, and it was a hits focused show, but it was almost his own homecoming to be able to play this music again. And he went on that tour. He went through a variety of his catalog, opening with Uptown, which was. That's just, like I said, everything I'm about to say, my mind is blown. So we could put that under the same umbrella. But to see later career Prince go back and revisit his life, essentially, that was really magical for me to see at that time. Nicolay.
The opening of Sign of the Times of the show is a damn masterstroke, and I was just thinking about how all of his tours have such great openers, like Around the World in a Day, Behind the Curtain, Snare Drum Pounds on 2 and 4, Love Sexy, The Future, the new tour, like his openers are steady, man. And when you hear that first guitar chord, it's a Sign of the Times show. The track comes in like a little bit after, but that first minute is pure genius. I think my favorite song is probably Forever in My Life on that tour, because I think it really just the interplay with Bonnie, the whole thing, the interplay with the audience, the drums and the acoustic guitar. I think that's literally right. Right. Yeah,
what's that, Harold? That's 4, right, Harold? That's my count. You got to count.
I love
me and Nicolay, we are so like I see you.
Yeah, we're twinsies. And I love If I Was Your Girlfriend too. I think that really worked on the tour, that live version. My favorite tours is probably I'm very close to what jooZt was saying. I think Parade, Sign of the Times, and Love Sexy. But I have to also say that I'm probably literally the only one in this entire thing but the Act 1 and 2 tours for me mean something really, really particular. And that sort of those 2 years leading up to Come and all that, those after shows, like that's a whole nother kind of worms. So I'm very much into sort of that 93, 95 time frame as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've got about 90 seconds left. I want to thank all 3 of you for coming on.
But before we do, did you answer your own question?
Right.
Oh no, I didn't. But you know how long-winded I am. I'll try to
I
be
didn't
quick.
think you had an answer, to be honest with you.
I didn't, and I had no intention of answering this myself. Top 3. I'm gonna give you 5 because that's how I roll. Number 1, Love Sexy. Number 2, Sign of the Times. Number 3, One Night Alone. Number 4, Controversy. And number 5, Parade.
Controversial as always. I like it.
You got a favorite song from this set?
From this, I have to go. It's between Housequake and It's Gonna Be a Beautiful Night. If Strange Relationship made the main show, it would be Strange Relationship unequivocally.
Right. That's a crime that didn't happen. That's a straight up crime.
Yeah.
Well, if I can take a moment, if possible, if you can find this, let me get it in camera. This is I know that I believe that Rocket Pool in the UK, I think Rocket Pool in London still has some copies of this, but it's a set that was only released in Germany. It is the closest thing to being an official release of the movie Sign of the Times. It's on Blu-ray as well as DVD. Their liner notes. It's good. It's a good addition, almost an appendix, if you will, to the massive set that has come out for Sign of the Times. Well worth their money. And I'm now 13, 14, 15 seconds over. I want to thank all of you for joining me, but also all of you that tuned in, stayed with us, threw in a lot of your comments, and just share this experience with us. So I appreciate it. And D'Angelo, really awesome. Thank you.
Thank you
for having me and asking me to be a part of this.
I really appreciate it. I'm going to take 5 more minutes to say a couple of things. One, Melina shouts out Peach and Black podcast, who are actually on that Sign of the Times.
They do the commentary, right?
They do the commentary, and I just like to give a shout out to them because they've been doing podcasts for so long, and I really love their multi-part series that they did for the 1999 Deluxe. It was phenomenal. I hope they do one for Sign of the Times Super Deluxe at one point. Going back to Strange Relationship, my favorite version, and one of the reasons why I really wanted that First Avenue show, the video, was that version of Strange Relationship was the only time I heard them really play that song that way. And it was so darn funky. Oh my God. And when he says, "Is it good to you, Bonnie?"
Yeah, like that's the highlight. Like that one moment, that entire that interplay between Bonnie and Prince at that moment, that's worth the price of admission for the entire season.
It's worth the price of admission, definitely. I mean, you got to seek out that First Avenue. And I am sending, like prayers and bat signals. Please, Prince Estate, please. I'm down on my knees begging you, please release that video of that First Avenue, the first show of the Sign of the Times band. I think it needs to be seen. I think it is really, really important. So please. I can almost cry. I think it's just so that important. So we're going to take a break, and I really enjoyed this conversation. You guys brought it, and I really, really appreciate. Again, this is a celebration. This is not a symposium. This is like Nerd Superfest. So I just nerded out. So I really appreciate it. And we're going to take a 29-minute break, and we will be back at 4 o'clock on the dot in the Eastern Daylight Time, or whatever it is, Eastern. And we're going to come back with one of my favorites, Madhouse Live. So we're going to have Dr. Fink in the house, which I'm super, super excited about. And Edgar is going to take hold of the reins. I probably will pop in because I can't help myself.
I think we all going to try.
Well, we got 4. So that's you got the most, right?
Yeah. Nicolay's not on this panel, the next panel. If you would have, I probably would be popping in. I don't know. We're synchronized, Nicolay. All right. So thanks, everyone. Again, grab something to eat and move your bodies, and be back here in like 28 minutes.